Hey, y'all, welcome to WildUte University. I am the dean of this university, the WildUte, and I have Professor Nathan Balmer Brown. What's going on,
Not
Professor?
not much. How we doing, you?
We're doing great here.
Good.
We've got a great show here on the docket, and a lot of the Big 12 folks that are in our community, they asked for this one, Nate, and this is KU, looking at
Okay.
KU's fit to the SEC. Are they
Okay.
fit? Are they SEC caliber? We're going to take a deep dive into that and stuff. The smoke around this came from really Greg Flugar. It
Okay.
was about a month or two ago, and Greg mentioned that KU is likely to be the 20th team targeted for the SEC if the SEC decides to go to 20.
Okay.
So it's not a guarantee or anything else. As Big 12 folks, as Big 12 fans, we hope KU stays. I want KU in this conference, but hey, the members wanted this video. We're going to give you what you asked for. We're going to look at the data and the analysis.
Okay.
Let's do it. So we're going to jump into it right here. Okay, so looking at the methodology, we've developed a new model for the SEC. It's the SEC realignment model. Nate helped. We have a data team for college football Mafia too that's involved in tweaking models and trying to get them optimized based on what we know of a conference. And based on the SEC, what's important to the SEC, you can see here the breakdown of the SEC model. Largely, it's driven by football metrics. Football viewership, number one, 25%. Football history, a Wikipedia Blue Blood rank. Revenue, operating revenue from the school, it's a 3-year basis. Basketball, the growth population-wise, so that's looking at 2050 based on UVA research information, what they expect state populations to look like. Also, the U.S. News, academic rankings, attendance, football attendance, and lastly, follower count. And recently we learned from Bob Thompson, actually, that follower count is a way to gauge brand size.
Yeah.
It's wild stuff. So we're going to take a look at these metrics. These are all going to spill into the overall ranking for KU compared to SEC schools. But how we're going to approach this video is we're going to look at 3 really downsides to KU, and then a few upsides and some swing factors when we're looking at KU as a candidate. So let's just jump into it. Let's look at the downsides to KU being an SEC candidate. And before we jump into that, Bomber, what do you think would be the greatest downside for KU, just off the surface? Like what?
Just football history. Me.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. Football history. So let's just jump into it. So the downsides here. All right, so yeah, it's football metrics, and the number one downside is really the viewership for KU. And you can see here, based on this graph, just how strong SEC viewership is. Like,
That's
look
crazy.
look at Bama; they're getting almost 5 million
I
per
know.
Nielsen rated game.
I know.
Like, man,
That is nuts.
and then like even Texas, like is kind of a middling SEC team based on their viewership. I mean, you're talking about absolute behemoths.
That is crazy.
And then so KU, looking at this metric, KU brings less than 1 million viewers per Nielsen rated game
Right.
over this period 2015 to 2023 throughout COVID year. And so you're looking, KU is definitely not, this isn't one of the strongest points.
Right.
Football and football viewership, and especially it's been some tough times in KU land. More recently, better with Lance Leipold, but I mean, this is factoring in some of the lean years and everything. So between Kentucky and Vanderbilt, we're looking at KU viewership for football. So when you're looking at it, one of the downsides for KU is just the viewership they bring. You would imagine, hopefully, KU get a lift going to the SEC, maybe more time spots. But really, I wouldn't expect a lot more. I wouldn't expect a tremendous amount of growth in the football viewership realm and stuff. That's really not what KU brings to the table.
Right.
To be honest with you. Okay, so let's now look at something else here as far as a downside. So there's one downside is football viewership for the Jayhawks. Now this is a bit surprising. I don't know, like when you think of KU, Bomber, like what do you kind of think as far as like the athletic department, how strong it is and everything and how much money you'd make?
Oh, I wouldn't know, but it doesn't surprise me that they're around that number because that seems to be pretty average. I mean, you go across the country and around 100 million or so is very consistent, I think. When you compare it against the rest of the SEC, though, obviously the media dollars is hugely disparate. There's a disparity between the conferences, which leads to a lot of that.
No doubt about it. Like in KU, when you're looking at like the operating revenues compared to Big 12 schools, it's pretty good. It's like above average.
Right, right.
But all of a sudden, when you apply them versus like these SEC schools, I mean, these are huge
Yeah.
budgets, huge revenue generations. Like, and they've had a better media deal, but like, just think about the new media deal.
Oh, that is just crazy.
Like, look how much freaking Texas and Texas A&M
I
are
know.
making.
I know. That is
Like,
so much. Wow.
this is
That's
based on a
remarkable.
3-year average. Yeah,
Right.
and like
Right.
this is based on the financial statements that each public institution provides to the NCAA.
Okay.
Sportico does a really easy breakout. So this is 3 years, last 3 years, looking at the operating revenues generated by the entire athletic department. So that's
Wow.
football, basketball, women's basketball, etc. And KU is the last. They're in the 17th spot, so not necessarily one of the strong points in the model for driving KU
Okay.
in the SEC. So let's move on here and look at another one. Here, this is the last downside factor. We're going to look at some upsides and some swing factors for KU. So looking at attendance, this is football attendance for the last 5 years. Okay.
Right.
So KU plays at a stadium named David Booth Memorial, and it's currently in a rebuild phase.
Right. It's like a high school stadium in Texas is what it used to be like. Yeah.
Yeah. And you can see like the old picture and the newer pictures on
Right.
this graph here. The older pictures show like, not quite as modern and stuff, but it had more capacity. It had over 47,000. It could get in. They've been averaging over the last 5 years, in the 20s.
Right.
So
Right.
they haven't been selling out a lot of games. And more recently, I'd hope that like over the last year and a half, 2 years since Leipold's been there, attendance has been better, but like it's been pretty rough for KU football attendance. This isn't factoring anything with basketball. We know that the Fog Allen Arena is nuts, and that basketball fans show up and sells out every game. It's absolutely mayhem. But in football, we're looking at football. Football drives the bus. 80% of every dollar in media rights comes from football. That's what we're taking a look at here. The new stadium under construction, when it's rebuilt, it's going to have a smaller capacity of around 42,000. So not quite as big and stuff. And you can just see no matter what, even if KU sells out every football game, they're going to be sitting in the 16th spot just based on the massive stadiums in the SEC.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's no doubt. But again, you're growing that football brand, right? That's going to take years. Mm-hmm. Some might say 5-10 years to bring those numbers up. If they fill at 42 and they fill it every year, they'll make more money. Everything will be better.
Yeah. Everything will be better. And if they get in the SEC, they start winning, you're probably looking at a stadium expansion.
Right.
How the model's looking right now that we're just like throwing, hey, what does your attendance look like over the 5 years? And it's kind of rough for the Jayhawks as far as football attendance. So those 3 factors are the downsides for KU. I want to look at some positive factors, why KU is really being even mentioned as a good SEC target. And let's just jump into those things here. Also, look at this logo too.
Where did that come from? That's the 1923 logo?
Yeah, that's really KU's logo back in 1923. Man, I just love this thing. It looks like this Jayhawk smiling. Oh gosh, I love it, man. So you got to just give it.
That's pretty crazy.
It is pretty crazy. Okay, so let's look at it. Okay, obvious, right? Basketball. KU is a clear blue blood. One of the elite of the elites. Basketball originated in Kansas and around Lawrence and everything. Basketball is everything for the Jayhawks. Massive brand, right? And so when you're looking at how we're viewing the model here, you can see like the different multipliers, national championships, AP rankings, all-time wins, NCAA tournaments. When you brew all that together, KU spits out in the number 2 spot out of 17, the 16 the SEC teams plus KU. And the reason for that, the reason that they're not in the number 1 spot is because Kentucky has 8 national championships.
Yeah, the national championship difference. Yep. Yeah.
KU's still like an elite basketball squad and everything. And frankly, all-time wins, KU has more all-time wins than anybody else. And that's including Kentucky or Carolina.
Wow.
So you're talking about just the bluest of the blue bloods. The SEC, this is really the reason, right? Like you're looking here, you've got freaking Kentucky. And then if you're adding KU too, you've got some of the most elite basketball brands if you could swing it. So that's a clear win for KU. And plus, like on the football side, going back to that, if KU jumps in the conference and they do have, more middling seasons and stuff, that's wins for the elite SEC teams, right?
Right.
like the Bamas and the Georgias and everything. So it might be a nice trade off for KU just to beat the crap out of everybody in basketball.
Yep.
Just losing football.
Yeah, it's true.
Probably right.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a negotiating position. It's something they could take back, and we're only going off of Sankey's own words. He said he wants to be an elite basketball conference. So the easiest way to do that would be to get Kansas and maybe even bring in North Carolina.
Bingo. Nailed it. 100%. And that's definitely a consideration here. That's in the SEC mind, and that's a big, big factor right here. Okay, another upside factor is follower count. Okay, so you're looking at above median and everything. So we're looking at follower count. This is a good
indication
of brand size.
Yeah.
And so KU is above the median, above the median point right there. So you're sitting there and like the KU basketball, like you almost have 1 million followers on Twitter X.
That's crazy.
That's huge, man. Like that compared to a lot of Big 12 squads. I mean, that's really, really strong. And it just shows you just the brand that KU is, the whole logo. You recognize Jayhawk, you recognize everything about KU basketball, and like it is a big time brand, and this illustrates it. So you're sitting in this 8th position without even have really good like football followership and stuff, but the basketball brand's so strong that it still gets you above the SEC average. It just shows you that, in my view, the KU Jayhawks are an above median brand even for the SEC. It's kind of what this points to.
Well, they're all about drawing. They want to be the number 1 conference in the country. Best way to do that is to bring in your brands. You have your rivalries, and then of course the competition level. So I think that's a really astounding number when you can see how low the football is. Right. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yep. So you're looking here, really strong brand, just pointing to that brand. So let's take a look at some swing factors. Okay. So we've looked at some of the downsides, the upsides, and clearly basketball and like this brand is where KU really shines. But some other factors here that aren't included in like the numerical model that need to still be considered because they matter. Okay. So other factors here. Okay. So number 1, it boosts Missouri adding KU.
Right.
So you've got Missouri in the conference. Missouri's been up and down, kind of below average. And like you really lift that brand if you bring the border war in-house.
Right.
The game is played at Arrowhead Stadium in Kansas City typically and stuff. It's a heated rivalry. And like all of a sudden Missouri's sitting pretty in a like much better position actually in conference and everything. So it boosts Missouri and it boosts KU. And we all know that rivalries drive viewership and intrigue.
Yep.
So that's definitely a factor here you want to consider. Obviously, it's also a contiguous state. Kansas is sitting right next to, bumped against Missouri and Oklahoma. It's still weird to think Oklahoma's in the SEC.
I know, right? It is. It's good stuff.
But you're touching Oklahoma now and Missouri and also Arkansas. You're almost touching Arkansas. So you can see that in the illustration, bottom right and stuff, how close KU is to those 3 schools. So really, I mean, you're right there. It's not going to create a lot of extra travel or anything. It might create some pod opportunities in the future too. And like an old school matchups and like the Big 8, so I think that really just the fact that it's so close, it's contiguous, it's what the SEC likes to do is another swing factor that's working KU's way here. And then lastly is KU is AAA accredited. They've got that status that everybody likes to talk about. And we sure know that the Big 10 loves the AAU accreditation. So does the SEC. Their SEC has a few AAU accredited institutions. They're trying to boost their research just like the Big 10. KU is one of 71 schools that has that accreditation. A few in Canada have it, mostly in the United States. KU is one of the 71 in that club. And so that's another swing factor here. Like that's getting factored into everything. Keep those in the back of your mind. Again, numerically and stuff, those aren't showing up in the model, but they're more bumps that you could add basically as a manual adjustment to KU.
Right.
Let's take a look now at the overall here. Let's see. What do you think? How are they going to score out, Nate? What do you think?
I'm going to think they're in the upper 2/3.
Okay.
So what does that mean? If they go to 18, that means they'd have to be like 11 and above.
Let's take a look. Okay.
Oh, not quite.
Oh, man, they're close.
Just missed them.
Just missed them. Hey, maybe
Just
it's just like, with the bump with the rivalry and like AAU, maybe it gets them a little bit closer. I mean,
that
everyone
football
wants to
number
say
is just so low, though. 0.06. That it's a football conference at the end of the day, right?
football
Yeah,
conference.
that has to change, and I think it could change. It's just going to take some time. I just
It's
don't
gonna
think now is the time for Kansas. I don't see that. I could be wrong.
So KU 13 out of 17 here, so 16 SEC schools plus KU. Hey, they beat out Missouri.
Yeah, well,
Missouri's been in the SEC for a decade. So like
yeah,
it speaks to like the brand power of KU. Yeah, if they happen to get into the SEC, they're going to lift a lot of these metrics just based on the size of these fan
right.
bases in the SEC. Like that's going to be the case for any school. 13 out of 17. I think that we're looking at more strategic ads here. Like this isn't a no-brainer for the SEC, but it's certainly, hey, this can make sense as a strategic ad. It's contiguous. A lot of factors we like here, the basketball, the brand, and everything. But it certainly is not for football.
Can you go back to the money slide, the revenue
Yeah,
slide,
let's do that.
really quick? Because when I look at that number and I see where it's at, so they're at the bottom at 112. But what's the difference over 3 years that these schools are making in the SEC versus the Big 12? Right? It's
Mhm.
closer to 30-40 million next year when the new deal starts. So you add
Gosh.
40 million to 120, and now all of a sudden they're up at 12 or 11. You bounce back to the last list, and now they're much higher. They're at 11 or 12. So I
So
think that's
a
something
lot
they need to
of
think about.
yeah, so this information, this financial information, was as of fiscal year end 20. So each school has a fiscal year end, like that's their
Right.
year end for their
Right.
financial statements in June. So this is June of 2023 information, and
Okay.
it's going back a couple of years. So it's not including the boosts that are we going to
Oh,
see. So
okay.
the
Okay.
numbers, like if we were to apply this analysis in like 2 years, the numbers would be
Yeah.
a lot crazier. But
Okay.
like,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, like it goes back to thinking what's like the Big 12 average? Like the Big 12 average is around 100 million,
I think it's right
maybe a
around
little
100.
less.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I
So
think
KU is good.
BYU's at like 108 or something like that. Yeah, 100 million is pretty much median in the Big 12 here. It's way at the bottom.
Like
So,
it's
yeah,
crazy.
it is
Like in
crazy.
these numbers, like once the new media deal kicks in, like
Yeah.
what the freak is Texas is like they're going to be making like 300 million a year.
It's going to be absolutely insane.
Yeah.
Absolutely insane.
But KU, I mean, like, okay, so that's like they're competing here, like they're right on the tails of Vanderbilt and Mississippi State,
Yeah,
and they don't even sell that much like football. Like, I mean, you saw the football
right.
attendance. Like, this is like considering ticket sales, concessions for football, sponsorships for football and basketball.
Yeah.
So with all that stuff being down and stuff, KU, I feel like KU still shows pretty well here. So KU. Brand, basketball, AAU, contiguous states, those are the factors that are really going to make a difference if they happen to get in the SEC. What are your final thoughts on it?
My final thoughts when Greg brought it up, I think they could be valuable to both the Big Ten and the SEC, like several brands that are out there that aren't in those conferences right now. I just don't think now's the time. And when you have brands like Florida State and Clemson that are struggling to find a home outside of the ACC, I just don't think the money's there. Things would really need to change. And I think we're probably 2030, 2029, 2031 is where I'm looking at for everything to possibly turn over and the dynamics to completely change. Because right now, I just don't see that there's a big reason to bring them in. Yeah, you could, but for what reason? There has to be a method to the madness.
Absolutely. I agree with you. It's not going to be today. If it ever happens, it's going to be in the future, and it's probably going to be at a reduced share when you're looking
Yeah,
at
I
that
would agree with that
metrics and
too.
everything.
Yeah.
Uh, it's not impossible by any means. It could be a strategic ad in the future and everything. But like again, if you went back and looked at, I want to show this just because this is pretty shocking. I think going back to the overall, like look at Texas and Oklahoma where they
Oh
scored
yeah,
out.
I know.
They were in the Big 12 along with KU. They had
Yeah.
the same opportunities and everything else, and they scored at 2 and 3 in this model. This
Yes.
speaks
Yeah.
to how strong those brands were.
Yeah.
and how strong they are in the SEC. And so KU is more of a strategic ad. They're not a no-brainer, but they're not completely, out of it for sure, especially
Right.
with like basketball value becoming more valuable in the future and everything. So, man, it's going to be really interesting to see. I hope KU stays in the Big 12. I love having them in the Big 12, and they're a fantastic member. And I can't wait to play basketball versus and stuff as a Ute fan. But really, that's going to wrap it up. Good insights, Bomber. And I am the Dean of WildUte University, the WildUte. And this is Professor Nathan Bomber Brown. And the class is dismissed. Take care, y'all.
Peace.